Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight. I'm Anna Kalczyńska. Pope Francis passed away this morning after leading the Roman Catholic Church for 12 years. He was 88 years old. The world bids farewell to the man who transformed the papacy through humility and openness.
Francesco è tornato alla casa del Padre.
Beatam Teresiam de In nome di Dio vi chiedo fermo.
Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the first pope from Latin America, has passed away this morning. He might not have perfected the church, but awakened its possibility. He did not erase suffering, but refused to look away. As the formal period of mourning begins, regular believers take to the streets to express their grief and sadness. Sonia Agata-Piszczan.
Shock, sadness, and tears. These are some of the reactions as the world mourns the passing of Pope Francis, the first South American to lead the Roman Catholic Church. The heartfelt response comes just a day after he greeted crowds at St. Peter's Square on Easter Sunday.
Shocked really, because when we saw him yesterday I thought he was getting a bit better. So it was really sad this morning when you heard that he's actually died.
He lived up to the last minute of his life, saying to the people, "Happy Easter, the Lord has risen." And today he has risen with the Lord.
Born in 1936 as Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, he felt a connection to faith even as a child, eventually becoming a priest at 32. As a Jesuit, Bergoglio worked in crime-filled areas of the Argentinian capital, being considered an ally of the disadvantaged. In 1998, he became the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. He is particularly remembered by his compatriots.
I mean, I'm from Argentina, the Pope is Argentinian, so, it has quite a bit of significance for us.
We feel enormous sadness. He was a pope who was very committed to the poor, to those in need. He was humble. He will be greatly missed.
In 2013, Bergoglio became the first non-European pope in 1,300 years. He selected his papal name in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, who rejected his affluent upbringing by taking a vow of poverty. This choice reflected Pope Francis's own values and mission, contributing to a legacy that is remembered worldwide.
I think he was very significant because he was very focused on social issues.
Pope Francis has prayed for South Korea when the Sewol ferry tragedy happened or whenever we were having difficulties. I am sincerely grateful for that. He used to say, "Dearest Syria," every time he spoke of Syria. He called on all international organizations to support Syria, our Christian presence here.
In turn, the Pope's passing has united believers around the world in prayer.
Right after work, I immediately came here to the Manila Cathedral because this serves for me as something like the Vatican in the Philippines. I will pray for him.
According to the Italian daily Corriere della Sera, Pope Francis died of a stroke. Argentina will observe a 7-day mourning period in the honor of his memory. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Agata-Piszczan.
Head of an institution of 1 billion followers globally, the Catholic pontiff is obviously a figure of great political influence. The passing of Pope Francis has been met with official reactions worldwide. Our EU correspondent Angela Skujins joins us now from Brussels. Good evening, Angela. Tell us more about the comments of world leaders on the passing of Pope Francis.
Yes, so Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk was one of the first European leaders to pay his respects to the 266th head of the papacy, Pope Francis, who died at roughly 7:35 on Easter Monday. Now, we also heard from former US President Joe Biden, a devout Catholic, who said that Pope Francis was the people's pope. We also heard official comment from the current serving US President Donald Trump, who posted a short but moving statement on his Truce social media account stating, "May God bless him and all those who loved him." Now, Pope Francis is remembered for being a staunch supporter of impoverished, poor immigrant communities, the son of Italian migrants in Argentina, the first non-European pope in a very long time. But despite this, we heard tributes flow in from leaders in the EU capital. We're talking about European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, European Council President Antonio Costa, European Parliament President Roberta Metsola, and High Representative Kaja Kallas. The flags behind me at the European Commission in Brussels are flying at half-mast to mark this solemn occasion, but also leaders from across the political spectrum in Europe have paid their respects. We're talking about Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor-to-be in Germany, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. So this really represents the impact that this leader had on those communities. Pope Francis, the first official visit he had as the head of the papacy was to the Italian island of Lampedusa. This is the first point many refugees visit in the EU before venturing forthward. We also had tributes come in from the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. We're expecting more comments to roll through. The public as well will have a chance to pay their respects as Pope Francis is expected his body to be moved to a public place in the Vatican tomorrow. So worshippers will be able to pay their respects for roughly 7 days before a funeral date will be set. But very much in the style of the People's Pope, his wishes is to be buried in a simple casket in a less affluent neighbourhood in Rome. So we'll have to wait and see what that ceremony will look like. But that is all from me. I'll send it back to you in Warsaw.
Thank you very much, Angela Skujins. And one dream has not come true. Pope Francis has been denied the dreamt visit to China. Ever since his first remarkably normal Buonasera on the evening of his introduction on March 13, 2013, Pope Francis signaled a very different tone from his pontificate. Pope Francis bitterly clashed with traditionalists and tirelessly fought for immigrants. He charmed the world with his humble style and concern for the poor, as well as his critique of capitalism and support for climate change. Aisha Abachi presents the legacy of the 266th Catholic pontiff.
From the moment he became Pope in 2013, Pope Francis's pontificate has been shaped by a clear and enduring message: peace.
May the sound of arms be silenced in war-torn Ukraine. May there be the boldness needed to open the door to negotiation and to gestures of dialogue and meeting in order to achieve a just and lasting peace. May the sound of arms be silenced in the Middle East.
One of his most symbolic gestures and a particularly striking moment of his pontificate was in April 2019, when he knelt to kiss the feet of South Sudanese leaders at the head of a country grappling with a horrific civil war.
I think that today in the world, this is the greatest plague, the sale of weapons.
Francis left a global mark with his message of peace, but also interreligious dialogue, most powerfully embodied by his historic 2021 visit to war-torn Iraq. This was the first ever papal visit to the country, where he held a symbolic meeting with Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, the spiritual leader of millions of Shia Muslims.
Iraq will always remain with me in my heart. I ask all of you, dear brothers and sisters, to work together in unity for a future of peace and prosperity.
Through various channels and rhetorics, Francis upheld the notion of mercy for one another.
People with homosexual tendencies are children of God.
He was a man who cared about the renewal of the Catholic Church. He cared about emphasizing mercy, which other popes also taught, but he seemed to have a special focus on this topic. He focused on the matter of the sick and the poor.
Despite stirring controversy, the Pope encouraged pastoral workers to welcome those who cohabit without marriage, as well as divorced and remarried individuals. And he sounded a global call to protect the planet.
Christian brothers and sisters, in the commitment to care for creation as a sacred gift of the Creator, let us stand with the victims of environmental and climate injustice.
During his 12 years, the pontiff made 47 trips outside of Italy, visiting more than 65 states and territories, clocking up more than 465,000 kilometers, and was prepared to travel more if his health had allowed it.
On the second day of the war, I went to the Russian embassy and said I was ready to go to Moscow to see Putin.
The pontiff kept working until the end. On Palm Sunday, he met U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. In his final Easter Urbi et Orbi, his annual global blessing, delivered just a day before his death, the Pope once again urged world leaders to lay down their arms and return to dialogue, thus concluding his pontificate of peace for peace. Reporting for TVP World, I'm Aisha Bacha.
The Pope's death will now trigger 9 days of mourning. The Vatican will then enter a transitional period called sede vacante, meaning while the seat is vacant, during which the rule of the Church is temporarily handed over to the College of Cardinals. At the end of this period, a conclave will take place with progressivist and traditional cardinals vying for control over the Catholic Church. Kazimierz Łysiak explains the complexity of the centuries-old chain of events.
The Pope's passing is a significant moment not only for the millions of faithful across the globe. It also comes with many consequences and responsibilities for the Catholic Church itself.
We expected Pope Francis to join the House of the Holy Father for some time now. Of course, it always comes as a big blow. Still, we are not afraid. There has always been continuity in the Catholic Church.
What happens after the Pope passes is laid out in a strict and precise set of rules, worked out over centuries. Firstly, the papal apartments are sealed and the Pope's ring is broken as a way to prevent any changes to his final will and to mark the end of his reign. The Church will then spend the next 9 days in mourning. It is also during that time that the Pope will be buried. Papal funerals usually gather tens of thousands of faithful from all over the globe, and this time is unlikely to be any different. 2 to 3 weeks after the funeral, the cardinals will gather to elect a new leader of the Catholic Church.
The conclave is when the cardinals come to Rome to elect a new pope. There are about 140 under the age of 80 who will enter into the Sistine Chapel to vote who should be the new pope. Each day they will have several ballots. They will decide who they want to be pope. At the end of each ballot, they will burn their ballots, and you can see the smoke from above Sistine Chapel.
The famous smoke from a special chimney installed on the roof of the Sistine Chapel has to be white to signify the cardinals agreeing on the new pope. If it's black, it means the vote was inconclusive and they have to deliberate again. Before the conclave gathers in May, it is the College of Cardinals which oversees the Catholic Church, although typically no major decisions are made in that time. A major change requested by Pope Francis before he passed regarding his funeral is that he will not be laid to rest in St. Peter's Basilica, a traditional resting place for most popes. Instead, he opted for the St. Mary Major Basilica across town, signifying his close connection to the Virgin Mary. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
Easter is over and so is the truce in Ukraine. Russia launched a drone attack on multiple regions overnight, shortly after the end of a 30-hour supposed Easter truce declared by Moscow. The ceasefire itself, according to President Zelensky, was violated over 3,000 times, leaving many doubting if Moscow wants peace. Our correspondent Oz Katerji is in Kiev. Good evening, Oz. What could be the consequences of the Russian unilateral break in the stated Eastern ceasefire in light of Donald Trump's expectation for Ukraine and Russia to sign a peace deal this week?
Well, I mean, from the Ukrainian perspective, this is Russia doing what the Ukrainians expect them to do. The Ukrainians don't expect Russia to respect ceasefires. They haven't respected ceasefires in their history with Ukraine. So this is not going to come as a surprise to Kyiv. The bigger question is how is Washington going to react to this? Now, it must be said both sides have traded blame for violations, but the Ukrainians will feel aggrieved. You know, they counted 2,935 violations during that window. And then after that, Russia responded with further missiles and drones, 96 drones launched into Ukraine overnight, 3 people killed and 7 people injured. So that's how the Ukrainians feel generally about Russia's ceasefire, Easter Sunday ceasefire proposal. And we must not forget, it came after a week of many, many, many civilians dying, dozens of civilians dying in attacks on Kirivili, on Sumy, that also killed many children. So, you know, these large attacks have been happening over the Easter period. So in light of that, Ukrainians don't feel very hopeful that they're heading to some sort of ceasefire next week. Donald Trump is basing this, according to the statements that he's given, on his meetings with Ukrainian and Russian officials. Now, Ukrainian and Russian officials may be saying to Donald Trump one thing, but the reality on the ground of what's actually happening here is very, very different. And the big problem, especially that we get after this weekend, is let's say these two sides do agree to some kind of ceasefire brokered by Washington. How does that then translate into a cessation of hostilities on the ground? If Easter Sunday is anything to go by, it doesn't. And any ceasefire that is held will need some kind of monitoring, will need security guarantees, will need punitive measures if it's broken. These are the kinds of conversations that the US hasn't been having. It isn't interested in providing those guarantees to the Ukrainians so far in negotiations. And without those things, the Ukrainians are going to feel very hard done by and not going to agree to concessions, especially not concessions that we're hearing reported in the US media, such as US recognition of Crimea as Russian. That's something the Ukrainians would certainly be heavily opposed to. So the Ukrainians are heading into further rounds of talks this week in London with British officials, hoping that they can get some more movement among this coalition of the willing that would monitor any ceasefire. But that eventual ceasefire still seems a long way away. Certainly, if it does come this week, it will surprise many people here in Kyiv.
From Kyiv, Oz Katerji, thank you so much, Oz. Catholics, Jews and Orthodox Christians were celebrating Easter together this year, as the date coincided with the Jewish and Orthodox holiday of Passover. In honor of the event, the Church of Blessed Edward Detkens here in Warsaw, district of Bielany, invited representatives of the 3 faiths for a joint celebration. A story by Zuzanna Jurek.
This year, the Easter Monday marks a very special day for all 3 major Abrahamic religions, that is Orthodox Christianity, Catholicism and Judaism. The representatives of all 3 of the major religions have gathered here at the Edward Detkens Church in Warsaw to celebrate this once-in-a-decade opportunity. This is what the day's host, priest Wojciech Drozdowicz, had to say about the reasoning driving a joint celebration.
Since we have a common date of April 20th, we decided to have a joint meeting today. Choirs came, wonderful Byzantine singers arrived, and they learned some Latin phrases, such as congratulations.
Today's celebrations began off with the Jewish choir performing traditional Paschal songs before the Orthodox choir took their round around the table. Now, the celebration was primarily driven by a lot of joy, which is exactly what the former head of the Jewish community in Łódź, Krzysztof Keller, had to say about today's celebrations.
Whenever there is an opportunity, whenever there is a heartfelt desire to get together and get to know each other, to celebrate together, it is always a priceless opportunity.
Following an array of musical celebrations, there was also one very special guest who made the headlines here, and that is Alexander Karnushov of Tbilisi, Georgia, who is the creator of the Christ the Pantocrator mosaic, which you can see right behind me. Speaking following the handover ceremony, this is what the head of the Greek Orthodox Church had to say about the meaning of today's celebration.
Firstly, I'd say it has an ecumenical dimension, a universal church, but not in the sense that we are all the same. There is one God for all of us, and that's very important for us. Jesus, our Lord, is the Creator who reigns over all of us.
Today's celebrations mark, of course, the end of this year's Easter, and I think it's fair to say that the joy associated and seen in today's performances and celebrations is the perfect representation of this time of year. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Jorge Mario Bergoglio, first Jesuit and first Latin American Pope, died at the age of 88. His legacy and what by many was described as controversial posture will be long debated by pundits and academics. But today, we mourn the passing of an ambitious leader who aimed at reforming the Vatican and relentlessly pursued the fight for a more just world. Joining me now to sum up the pontificate and try to assess the impact Pope Francis had on the Catholic Church is Sébastien Maillard, head of the Polish section of the Vatican Radio. Good evening, sir. Good to have you.
Good evening.
Thank you for being with us.
I'm the former correspondent of French daily newspaper La Croix.
La Croix, of course. Thank you so much for correcting. Pope Francis tried to reset the course of the Catholic Church. How will he be remembered? What will be Pope Francis' main legacy?
Well, it depends if you stand inside the church or outside, or inside the church or outside the church. I think from inside, he will be remembered mostly for a pope that was very appealing and really reaching out to the people outside the church. The way he acted, his humility, the name he himself. When you dare call yourself Francis in memory of Saint Francis of Assisi, I think it's quite a compelling name you give yourself for the pontificate, and the way he acted, the way he lived in St. Marta outside the palace of the Vatican City. I think that was his style, his really one-of-a-kind style of pontificate was remarkably watched by people both outside the church, and I think he will be remembered for this. I think inside the church, his legacy is still to be developed because he started process that are still to be unfolded, and I think he will be remembered for the synodality. Remember that he called for synods on the synodality itself. That is a sort of, I would say, a decentralization of the way the Catholic Church operates, so that not everything is decided from Rome, but that the principle of subsidiarity is respected, and that bishops themselves adapt the way they can follow the doctrine according to the place where they are. So this synodality and the fact that lay people are much more involved in the running of the church, I think this he has really spurred this movement, and this may depend also on his successor, but this synodality is to be remembered. And also, thirdly, from Christians, non-Catholic Christians, he will also be remembered as the Pope who fostered a dialogue in the continuity in the sense of John Paul II and Benedict XVI, but he really did a lot of that. And I think it's quite telling and meaningful that he actually passed away after an Easter, which was just recalled on your TV just before, that coincides with the Easter of the Orthodox. He made many trips to try to reach out, not to other Christian churches, but also to the Jews, to the Muslims.
We are experiencing right now some technical problems, but we hope to come back to this interview with Stéphane Maillard. Let me remind you, Jacques Delors Institute and La Croix. It's daily in France. And here we are just watching the images from the Vatican and the believers gathered on the great place of Saint Mark. Some pictures of the pontificate of the deceased Pope Francis. We're trying to come back to Sébastien Maillard. Good evening once again. Thank you for joining us.
Sorry.
And thank you for making this introductory summarization of how could we sum up this pontificate of Francis. But you talked a lot about the reform of the church itself, the Catholic Church itself. However, Pope Francis was disappointing many liberals who hoped that perhaps he might introduce some more progressivist policies, such as greater role of women in the church, communion for the divorced or unmarried, a reform of priestly celibacy. Why did he stop halfway, balking at making major decisions?
It's difficult to know what his personal views were on all of this, but he has to guarantee the unity of the church, to maintain this unity. And you could tell by the very first synod he did, which engaged with the issue of if divorced people could attend communion and the Eucharist. Well, in that sense, he could tell how divided his own church was. And so I think he went as far as he could while maintaining the unity. But I think if I had to sum it up, I think he tried to both secure the doctrine while putting lots of flexibility in the pastoral way of putting it on the ground. So doctrine security while being flexible on the way it is put in place in each different parts of the world. And so this why I think he raised some expectations. Maybe some of the most progressive were hoping for much more. I think his first duty as the Pope was not to divide the church, but to maintain its unity. And you could tell, I remember covering a synod in 2014 and 15 where you could tell from the African bishops compared to some European bishops that they were really divided on issues as fundamental as the sacrament of marriage. So I think he couldn't go as far as others would want if he had to maintain this unity as Pope.
Sébastien Maillard, thank you so much. Special Advisor, Jacques Delors Institute and La Croix. Thank you once again for being with us. And thank you for watching this special edition of World News Tonight. Please stay with us here on TVP World. See you soon.